Hello. Welcome to Muriel's Murders. I'm Muriel, and I love true crime.
I'm Nick, and I am not a fan.
Thank you for joining us. Each week, I force Nick to listen to me tell him a story of a true crime. This week, we talk about the strangest case ever argued by Abe Lincoln.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Oh, he was a lawyer, wasn't he?
He was a lawyer.
Oh, you always forget that. At least I always forget that, mostly because I know nothing about history.
Are you? I know. Actually, I think this is going to be a fun one. I always think that there are pieces of history that are like obvious that a lot of us just don't know.
That's true for all pieces of history for me.
I just know a lot of history from watching The Simpsons, which has been really weird growing up because I've been like, oh, why did I think that happened?
Someone made a really, really good joke about it. It was imprinted in my mind forever.
And when I was a child, I completely took it seriously.
All right. Well, there is something that I take seriously.
What?
And that is thanking the people that sign up for our Patreon. We have to give a huge thank you to Molly, our newest Patreon member. Thank you so much for signing up.
Yes. And thanks again to everyone leaving these great reviews on Apple Podcasts. The more the merrier, baby. Keep them coming, you know. We love you.
Thank you.
Okay, back to business. The story we're about to tell is a true crime story involving murder, violence, drugs, adult themes, etc. So, if any listeners are like Nick and they don't want to hear about those kinds of things, please consider listening to a different podcast.
And sometimes we get caught up in the moment and swear words do slip out of our pretty little mouths, so please consider yourself warned.
All right, Nikki, are you ready to hear this story?
No!
Okay, let's get started.
Okay, Professor Montgomery, here I am, your bright-eyed student, ready to get a history lesson.
All right, you weirdo.
What you got for me?
Here we go.
Let's do it.
So, before he was a famous president, Abraham Lincoln practiced law in Springfield, Illinois as a prairie lawyer, starting in 1837.
Are you going to explain what a prairie lawyer is?
I will.
Okay, great.
So, a prairie lawyer it's also called a country lawyer or like a country doctor. It's kind of a term for people who work in the profession who service like a small community.
Okay.
Which means, you know, you deal with the types of issues that a small community would deal with. So you're like maybe small claims or property lines or, you know, things of that nature. And they tend to be the type of lawyers that also don't have a specialization. So they kind of are a catch-all lawyer.
Okay, great. So they're of the people in the rural communities.
Right. And this is like kind of what helped earn his reputation as being Honest Abe. It's like working in these small communities as this country lawyer.
That makes sense. It would be hilarious if it turned out Abe Lincoln was a super crooked lawyer.
Yeah, I mean, maybe he was. I don't know.
Okay.
I'm no scientist. But he did practice law as a prairie lawyer. And remember, too, while we're telling this story, so this is from an essay that he wrote himself. So this is all information from his accounting. And he also lived there and knew everybody. So whatever he's talking about, you know, it's from his perspective, but he knows like all the people who live in Springfield.
Got it. Yeah. Right. And I know that I don't need to ask this question.
What?
Not even close. And I know none of our listeners need to ask this question.
Abraham Lincoln was a former U.S. president.
Not that. What year is going on here?
Oh, I already said that.
You did? I'm already failing the test.
I know. So he started practicing law in 1837. This story starts in 1841.
Okay.
Also, just as a little side note, Lincoln was a self-educated lawyer. So he worked as a law clerk. And then in his spare time, he would study. And then he passed the bar in 1836. But like you could do that back then. You didn't have to go to law school. I don't even know if you went to law school. I think you just studied under lawyers.
Oh, that sounds fun. Like an apprenticeship program.
They're like, nowadays it's like $120,000 later.
It could be $400,000 later now at this point. I actually don't know.
It's pretty wild. Okay. So back to the story.
Yes.
So in 1841, there were three brothers living in Illinois: William, Henry, and Archibald Traylor. Archibald lived in Springfield and was known to Lincoln as being this super reasonable, industrious carpenter.
All right.
He was about 30 years old, and he was a bachelor, so he was unmarried. And he lived in a boarding house with his business partner, who was a dude named Myers. So I don't know. I think it was just kind of like a bachelor pad roommate situation.
Okay, great. Yeah, I get it.
So Henry was a little older, and he had a family and a farm in a place called Clary's Grove, about 20 miles north of Springfield.
Mm-hmm.
And the oldest brother, William, lived about 100 miles north of Springfield. So if you can imagine Springfield, Clary Grove, and Warren County, where William lived, they're all kind of in a straight line north from each other.
Okay.
So it's like Springfield, 20 miles later, Clary Grove,
Yeah.
and then 80 miles after that is Warren County.
Ooh, a little geography lesson also.
Yes, well, I'm just naming off places people live.
Okay.
So he was a widower. William, the oldest brother, was a widower, and so he lived on a farm with his kids, but no wife.
All right. Do you know what happened to his wife?
I don't know what happened to his wife.
Okay.
But I feel like people,
Yeah, it's the 1840s.
they'd be out there
Who
dying,
knows?
yeah.
R.I.P. Whoever she was.
So a guy named Fisher, who was around 50 years old and was a drifter kind of / handyman guy, was living with William at the time. So he would he didn't have a family or a house or anything like that. So what he would do is he would move in with people and trade like work for money. Right. And room and board, basically.
Okay. Right. So he's like a hobo with a bindle, jumps on the trains, goes wherever the wind takes him, shows up, does some work, eats some food, and then just goes on his merry way when it's time for some new scenery.
Kind of. Yeah. I mean, no, he lived in this town. He just would like move around in this town.
Oh, so he just was couch surfing from place to place. He was not traveling the country.
Right.
Okay.
People knew Fisher. They like know Fisher in the town and like whatever. They know Fisher in the county.
Yeah, I would like to say that I just imprinted my fantasy of living in the 1840s on that man.
Okay, great.
Just being on the rails and, traveling the world.
Definitely.
Okay.
Also, rumor has it around town that he had socked away a ton of money by his sort of homeless lifestyle.
Oh.
So he was rumored to have a lot of money saved away somewhere.
All right, cool.
So one day, William decides he wants to take a trip to visit his brothers, and Fisher came along with him. So they get in their horse and buggy and they drive to Springfield. So they first picked up Henry in Clary's Grove, and then they spend the night there, and then they land at Archibald's boarding house in Springfield the next day.
So it's at least like a 2-day horse and buggy trip.
Yes, definitely. At least a couple days in transit.
Okay.
So they get to Springfield, they get all settled in, and the four of them have lunch at the boarding house, and then they spend the afternoon walking around the town and looking at stuff because there's no TVs or anything.
Yeah, right. They're like, what's going on in this town?
They're just checking it out,
All right.
And then they come back for dinner. And when they come back for dinner, the three men walk in, the three brothers, but Fisher's gone. And, there are people living in the boarding house. There are people around.
Yeah.
And everybody is asking him, where's Fisher? Where's this guy?
Yeah.
And they say they don't know. They have no idea where he went. So,
okay, all right.
So the four of them are walking around between lunch and dinner, and they're like, well, I don't know. He's gone.
No clue.
No clue. He just disappeared.
All right. And everyone's just like, you should have some clue.
And they say, no, we don't know.
Okay.
So they say, but don't worry, we're going to go looking for him after dinner. They go out, they search after dinner. It's dark. They go home and they don't find Fisher. They come home and go to bed.
Okay.
The next morning, they wake up really early before breakfast, and they search all morning. They have breakfast. They go out again after breakfast. And then after lunch, William and Harry decide they are going home. They don't care.
They're done looking.
They're done looking.
Okay.
And the other boarders and townspeople who by now kind of know what's going on, they're just kind of like, well, you can't just leave him here. He lives 100 miles away.
Yeah.
You're his only ride. There's no like bus.
Yeah, there's not a sick like horse and buggy system.
I mean, it's pretty drastic to just leave him there. And so people are like, you can't just go. But Henry and William are just over it, and they leave. So they go home.
All right.
So after about 4 days, Henry, the middle brother who lives in the kind of midpoint city, Clary's Grove, he comes back to Springfield 4 days later to look for Fisher because still no one's heard from him at all.
Yeah.
And he goes and picks up his brother Archibald at the boarding house, and they kind of look around the whole town looking for Fisher.
All right.
And they can't find any sign of him again. So Henry goes home. And William at this point is like, I'm done. This guy, I don't care. I'm at my house.
Yeah, right.
About a week later. So at this point, what's that? I don't know, 11 days from the time that Fisher's missing. About a week later, on Friday, the Postmaster General in Springfield gets a letter from the Postmaster General in Warren County, where William lives.
I'm assuming those are important people. What did a Postmaster General used to do?
They kind of, from what I'm reading, it's like they manage the mail, right? But back in the day, in the rural parts of the U.S., around this time, there wasn't like a really you didn't have like a delivery service most of the time. So like you would get your mail from the post office. They didn't deliver. And they were usually like a general store or something like that. So the person was just a kind of a prominent general store person who would get the title of Postmaster General.
Okay.
Because they're like, if you can run a store, then you're organized enough to deal with the mail.
Right. You're official enough. Here's some authority. We're calling you the Postmaster General.
Right. And they would do stuff like they post news, from like national news or news from the area. They do public postings. Or like wanted posters or different kind of things like that.
All right.
They're basically two dudes.
Okay. All right. Good. With good jobs.
With okay jobs.
And
right.
very important sounding titles.
So, right. It's not like the Postmaster General. It's like the Postmaster General. The telegram that the Postmaster General in Springfield received, it said that William came home from Springfield bragging about how Fisher died in Springfield and willed all his money to him, which was about $1,500, which was about $50,000 in today's money.
Damn. Okay, Fisher.
Yeah,
very good.
A lot of money.
Yeah, he's doing good. I guess those rumors were true.
Yeah. So the postmaster from Warren County felt like William was just acting super weird about the whole thing. He wanted confirmation about the story from Springfield. Yeah. So, like a buster, the Springfield postmaster just straight up posted the letter publicly. Damn. He writes back to him. He says, no, that's not what happened. Yeah. He's been missing. They've been looking for him. They said he ran away. Yeah. And then he takes the letter and puts it in the window.
Right. It's the old school version of like screenshotting and posting DMs or something.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And everyone got super hyped up on the drama.
Hell yeah.
Because there were about 3,500 people who lived in Springfield at the time, which is a small town, right? Like right now, that's what you'd say.
It seems small,
right?
Tiny.
And so I think it's few enough people that there's this great small town drama feeling. If there's a rumor, it can get through 3,500 people really quickly.
Yeah, sure.
But at the time, that was kind of a metropolis. Springfield was the seat of Illinois at the time. Mm-hmm. So they had all kinds of city officials and stuff like that. Like that was a big old town.
Okay, I get it.
And even for reference, like Chicago at the time, the population of Chicago was 4,470 people.
Oh, so it's basically the same size as Springfield.
Yeah, comparatively, it was a big city at the time.
Oh, okay.
But it's funny to think about because regardless of whether or not relatively it was a big city, when you think about a rumor spreading really quickly,
right?
Something like that. As soon as he posts something in the window,
everyone's just losing their minds,
right? And all the city officials know. Yeah. And I think it's also worth it. Based on like what happens next, it's worth it to also just remember that if Fisher had disappeared in a smaller town, maybe this case wouldn't have even happened. You know what I mean? It's like the rumor mill of a small town meets the resources of a little burgeoning metropolis that like equaled this incredible trial that Abe Lincoln was a lawyer for, and it was a big old thing,
Right. So it's a particular gumbo pot of all these perfect ingredients that equal this tale.
Right. Gumbo pot. That's a good metaphor. So the attorney general of the state of Illinois, who like lives in Springfield, grabs the mayor of Springfield, and they start a manhunt for Fisher's body.
Oh,
right?
damn.
Immediately, like the same day.
That's crazy. You think about a mayor being personally involved in a manhunt?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
it's like it's
okay.
a teeny town, but
Yeah.
it feels big. And then you have, you know, the attorney general and the mayor of Springfield. And they're like, come on, guys, we're going to find this body. Right. And it's also like 3,500 people. I don't know. I think it's great. So the ensuing search was super dramatic. They searched everywhere. They searched cellars and wells, and they searched all these different pits they knew about in Springfield. And then they went around and they dug up all the fresh graves in the cemetery to see if his body was in one of the graves. And they also went and dug up all the newer graves of all the dead horses and dogs. Which
oh my God.
When you think about it, that's pretty drastic.
Well, right now, so the series of events is this guy shows up missing, then someone starts bragging about him dying, right?
Yeah.
But he's not bragging about killing him or anything like that. Just like, oh, he passed away, he's gone. And then this town loses their mind and digs up all of the graves.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's slightly different. It's that the postmaster writes a letter to the other postmaster saying, hey, some dude in our town is acting crazy. Is his story true? And then before consulting with anyone, the Springfield postmaster's like, man, that story is not true. And I know it's not true because we look for Fisher. Yeah. And then he just puts it in the window. Yeah. So all the people who had been looking for Fisher see this thing and they're like, that's ridiculous. That story's not true. And then the mayor gets involved.
It seems like everyone was just waiting for a reason to grab their shovels and start digging up graves.
Of course they were.
Yeah.
If they're like, oh, I'm going to drive 100 miles to go have lunch with my brother and then walk around and look at stuff in a town, they're all looking for something to do.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. They're like, I was going to check the pits anyways, you know? Oh, the cellar? Yeah, I'd go down there once a week anyways. Let's see if there's a dead body.
So this is all the first day also, right? So as epic as the search was, Springfield's still a tiny-ass town. So the search began on Friday when the letter arrived and ended the next day on Saturday. Like it only took them a little while to dig up all the graves, and they're like, well, I don't have any more ideas.
They're like, well, did we get all the fresh horse graves? There's like, yeah, there was 2. We did it. We're done. He's not here. So they didn't find him.
No, they didn't find him.
All right.
So they send officers to go arrest Henry and William in their respective towns on Sunday morning. So while everyone's waiting for the officers to bring back the brothers, the investigation continues and they start taking people's accounts, like witness accounts. So people around town were claiming that they saw the brothers use gold pieces to pay for things that they believed belonged to Fisher, which I'm kind of like, how would you know that?
How'd you know? Yeah, they thought, oh, that gold is definitely Fisher's gold.
They don't know Fisher or the brothers. You know what I mean?
Right.
They live in other towns.
Yeah, right.
These nosy ass people.
They did not seem like the kind of people that would have gold. They must have killed a man for that gold.
So on Monday morning, one of the officers arrives with Henry, the brother who lives a little closer to Springfield. And they interrogated Henry for 2 days. And on Wednesday, he admitted that William and Archibald murdered Fisher without Henry's knowledge. But then the next day, they forced him to help them move the body and keep a lookout while they buried it in a swamp before they all headed back home the next day. So basically they killed him the day he went missing and then reburied the body in a pond nearby on the second day before heading home.
Right. So they were like, we're just going to go look for him again in the morning, like before breakfast or whatever. And they were like, okay. And then they came back, but really they were moving the body.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, up to this point, Archibald, the brother who lived in the boarding house, he had a great reputation in Springfield, and he wasn't even suspected in the crime.
Right. God.
So these guys, the entire time, like Archibald was there when Fisher disappeared, but because of his good reputation, they didn't even ask him what was up. They just were like, man, this is crazy.
I guess we're going to arrest your brothers.
Yeah, but you're fine.
Right.
They like drove out of town to go pick up Henry William.
Yeah.
But Archibald was fine. So then they're like, oops, Henry had his confession. So they go and arrest Archibald.
God, I guess brothers just snitching on brothers right away.
So Henry had this super detailed account of what happened. So he says he wasn't there, but Archibald and William killed Fisher in the woods. They took the horse and buggy out to the woods and killed Fisher in this struggle in the woods.
Brutal.
Then the next day, when they brought Henry back to the scene of the crime, they forced Henry to stand lookout while they drove the buggy back into the woods through this thicket, picked up the body, and then drove the body over to a pond that was helping like a mill turn, called a miller's pond or something like that.
All right.
So it's this guy's pond, right?
Okay.
And then they backed the buggy in and threw the body in the swamp or the pond. And then they all sort of got in the buggy and got their horses and then went home. And when a search party searched that area, they found buggy tracks following the exact path that Henry described in the thicket, along with signs of his struggle in the middle of the thicket. Then they found buggy tracks backing up to the pond and then taking off north toward William and Henry's respective hometowns.
Okay, so the story checks out.
Yeah, and the physical evidence is all there. I mean, it's been over a week, but I guess they went there and they could see all of the physical evidence and the tracks and everything.
All right.
Exactly how Henry said it. So the mayor enlists hundreds of men to rake the pond for Fisher's body.
I like thinking that it's not even a big pond.
No, it's not. It's not that big. It's not that big, but they're raking it right by hand. And by Thursday, they had drained the entire pond.
Damn.
But there's still no sign of the body. So on Friday, the next day, the officers returned from Warren County with William in custody. So it took them, I don't know, a week, 5 days to make that drive. It was a long time. I think they were kicking it.
Yeah, just having fun on their horse and buggy adventure.
Yeah. So they return with William in custody, as well as this guy. He's not arrested. He just is coming to talk to the people in Springfield. And he calls himself Dr. Gilmore.
Okay.
And just, I don't know, I think as an aside, it took about 16 weeks to get through medical school back in the 1800s.
That does not sound like enough. That's all they knew back then. They're like, 16 weeks covers the basics.
Not that much. It was definitely, there were no entrance exams or anything like that. So it was pretty easy to add, doctor to your name and call yourself something, doctor something.
Right. It sounds like all the schools back then were all ITT techs or something.
Yeah. So apparently after the officers had arrested William and they were heading back the 100 miles to Springfield, they stopped for the night in this little town called Lewiston. And really late that night, Dr. Gilmore arrived at the inn. So he's out of breath. He's been traveling, trying to catch up to them.
Yeah.
And he's claiming that Fisher was alive and hanging out at his house. And he had followed the officers just to relay that info so they could just release William. However, for some reason, Dr. Gilmore did not bring Fisher with him.
Right.
So he just wanted to let people know what was up,
Okay.
And the officer was obviously skeptical of this random doctor.
Yeah.
So he decided to take William to Springfield anyway with the doctor in tow. So the doctor can go tell the mayor or whoever what he wants to say.
Right.
But he's like, I'm not going to deal with you. I'm not going to tell them to let William. I'm not going to give you back William. So, when when Dr. Gilmore arrives in Springfield, he goes up to the authorities and he tells them the same story. Fisher's at my house. He's alive, but he didn't feel like coming to Springfield.
Right.
So I'm just here to take William back.
Yeah, just a big misunderstanding.
Right. And Henry hears this, right? Henry, the brother, hears that Fisher's alive at Dr. Gilmore's house.
Yeah.
And he says no. He adamantly reaffirmed his own story about his brothers killing Fisher. He says, there's no way. I saw the body. I know they killed Fisher.
Right.
And at this point, nobody knows what to think. So eventually the town decides that Obviously, Dr. Gilmore was a friend of William, just trying to get the brothers off.
Yeah, pretty clearly, right? Yeah.
So
What
while
if
all
that
of this is
worked?
going on,
Yeah.
this dude Myers that Archibald lived with, you know, the guy who lived at the boarding house,
Yeah.
he's over it. And he decides he's going to sort it all out once and for all. And so he takes off to drive the 100 miles back to Warren County to see if Fisher is actually at Dr. Gilmore's house.
Okay.
And then if he was, he's
Yeah.
like, I'm bringing him back to Springfield. So
Yeah.
Myers takes off and the trial is about to start.
Okay.
So Henry takes the stand at the trial. And again, he testifies about how his brothers murdered Fisher for his money. And the prosecution brings in tons of witnesses to testify that they saw the brothers take Fisher into the thicket in question and return without Fisher. And then they say the next day, other people saw the brothers drive the buggy to Hickox's mill pond, the pond, just like Henry testified. And then you
Okay.
also have all the physical evidence in the thicket, and a bunch of people testified about how the brothers were passing this unusual amount of gold pieces after Fisher disappeared. So everybody is saying like, I saw this, I saw the whole thing, which
But they're waiting until now. Weren't they the same people also just digging up graves and looking for stuff?
I know there was something kind of fishy about this, but you get that feeling, that small town buzz. You know what I mean? Like people are like, "Oh yeah, I saw that guy." You know what I mean? Like they're
But
just,
they're swearing on Bibles in courtrooms.
they don't care. I don't even think there's a police officer. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right. They're like, I don't know, this guy Abe Lincoln is the lawyer. He's a prairie lawyer, whatever that means.
I mean, they're all just pumped. You know, the
Yeah.
whole town is trying to pack into this courthouse to see what's going on. Nothing goes on in the city, you know, or in this town, and so people are saying, you know, I saw him. Oh man, he had 50 pieces of gold. And then he bought a chicken. Then he killed the chicken. And then he ate the chicken.
I was there for every minute.
Yeah, it's pretty great.
Yeah, that's intense. Wait, I have a question.
Yeah.
So Lincoln is one of the lawyers at this point.
He's the defense lawyer.
Defense lawyer.
So he's working on behalf of the Traylor brothers.
So now all of these townspeople are coming up and saying, I saw his client murder this man.
Exactly.
And then move the body and spend his money.
Exactly. So
right.
that's the prosecution. They're the ones, you know, prosecuting the Traylors.
Okay.
So Abe Lincoln kind of tells this story. He's very modest. He doesn't really talk about his role in it at all. He just talks about the story because he just thinks it's great. So the prosecution rests and the defense begins their case, and they call Dr. Gilmore to the stand.
All right.
And Dr. Gilmore starts to talk, and he says, you know, I live about 7 miles away from William, and I actually heard of William being charged with Fisher's murder. And so I knew about that in the ether. And one day after returning home, he says he found Fisher in super poor health, really, really sick, hanging out on his porch, on Dr. Gilmore's porch. And Fisher is unable to account for his absence or how he got 100 miles from Springfield back home.
Oh, so he remembers going to Springfield.
He doesn't remember how he got back, and he's really sick, right? This is according to Dr. Gilmore.
All right.
He's looking at this guy, and he's thinking, well, I got to say something because I know that the officers just arrested William.
Yeah.
So he jumps on his horse, and he like tears after the officers, and he gets there, and he's like, no, Fisher's alive in my house. And they're
Right.
like, you're crazy, dude. Get out of here.
Yeah. He's like, no, I'm being a really chill bro right now.
And he says he didn't bring Fisher because he seemed so sick. And he says, Dr. Gilmore says he's known Fisher for years because they all live in Warren County, you know, around each other. And he says, I've known Fisher for years. And he knows that he occasionally has these like bouts of derangement because he had a head injury as a child. So occasionally Fisher will have these like spells where he's kind of a big old weirdo, right?
Okay, great.
And he knows that to be true. So
All
he says
right.
that's probably what happened, but Fisher's at my house.
All right.
And everyone at the trial thought that Dr. Gilmore sounded so truthful that they decided to just release the Traylor boys in spite of all the evidence and Henry's confession.
So the entire town testifies to witnessing murder and moving of a dead body.
Yeah.
And then one guy is just, I guess, not histrionic. And they're like, well, he's from that other town. And so he's not caught up in the drama of this.
He's a doctor.
What is going on with actual Fisher? If he's alive, they could have gotten him by now, right?
Well, and everybody knew that Myers was going down to check it out anyway.
So they just got on with the trial real quick?
Yeah.
They're like, he might not be back.
So
people disappear in these neck of the woods.
Yeah. So they released the trailers. And then a couple days later, Myers comes back with Fisher.
Oh, so Feelgood was what? I just call him Dr. Feelgood. What's his name?
Gilmore.
I think because he sounds like a witch doctor, or like, one of those fake sort of like, I'm a guy, Dr. Feelgood. Yeah. Dr. Gilmore was telling the truth.
Yeah. Myers came back and he's like, why did I drive 200 miles round trip to get this guy if you're just going to let him off the hook? But he did. He drove all the way down to Warren County, picked up Fisher, and drove him back. And he was totally alive.
My eyebrows are shoved together so tightly, I assume some of our podcast listeners can hear them scrunching. So what is going on with everyone saying they saw a murder and the brother saying my brothers killed someone?
Well, I mean, I think they were just hyped. They said the case was closed, despite the fact that there was no explanation for the fact that Henry's testimony matched all the physical evidence that they found, and it matched the witness testimony. And Henry never recanted his story. He stood by his story this entire time. And also, no one ever found out what the hell happened to Fisher. He doesn't remember, and nobody knows.
What is going on?
I don't know. William died a year later, and then Archibald died a year after that. And at the time that Lincoln wrote this essay, Henry was still alive, but he never spoke to anyone about the trial ever again. He never said a word about it, and he never recanted.
Weird. He's like, that whole time when I made up the story of my brothers killing that guy.
Never said anything. Never. And both of his brothers died.
Damn.
And then after the trial, William Traylor stiffed Lincoln on his attorney's fees. So Lincoln had to sue him. And he won.
He's like, you didn't do any work for me. You call yourself Honest Abe. What did you really do for me?
You just put the doctor on the stand.
And then Fisher waltzed in the door and I got off.
Afterwards, Lincoln wrote a letter to his friend about the aftermath of the trial. And I want to read you like a section of it because I just think it's really funny. Okay. And I think it perfectly sums up sort of the energy of the town and maybe why this had happened.
Sure.
Thus stands this curious affair. When the doctor's story was first made public, it was amusing to scan and contemplate the countenances and hear the remarks of those who had been actively in search for the dead body. Some looked quizzical, some melancholy, some furiously angry. Porter, because remember, he knows all these people.
Yeah.
Porter, who had been very active, swore he always knew the man was not dead and that he had not stirred an inch to hunt for him. Langford, who had taken the lead in cutting down Hickox's mill dam and wanted to hang Hickox for objecting, looked most awfully woebegone. He seemed the victim of unrequited affection.
Oh my God. Wait a minute. So you mean when they were like searching through the pond, they were like, well, in order to search this pond, we have to ruin your mill.
Yeah. And then the mill worker was like, don't ruin my mill. And this guy's like, we should hang him, guys. Like, I mean, that's how like high pitched, fever pitched this thing was. He's
right.
Like, we got to hang him. And then now he's like super sad.
Right. Everyone wants a dead body.
Yeah. And then he says a man named Hart, who was like a beer delivery guy for the brewery, said he was super upset. And he said it was too damn bad to have so much trouble and no hanging after all.
So they were just looking for a public execution.
Like, and you hear this story. I mean, Abe Lincoln, he's in this town and he was there for years, you know, working in this community in Springfield. And he knows all the people in the courtroom and just watching, in a week, they dug up all the fresh graves of animals and humans and drained this pond, and they were doing all this crazy stuff. And then they had this trial, and then this one guy just testified really, really good, and then they let the brothers go.
I love how the one guy, too, he was super active in the manhunt.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, when Fisher shows up, he's like, oh, I knew he wasn't dead.
Exactly.
I didn't even look. You guys were all freaking out. I was just laughing at you guys digging up the wells and searching in all the cellars. Not me. I was sitting back with the lemonade.
Like, it was just this perfect holding up the mirror, to the true self of this town.
Right.
And like just this idea that everyone is in the middle of Illinois just bored out of their minds,
Well, it's weird too, this phenomenon of people being convinced that they witnessed it, right? So like some of them probably just heard the story and they don't have television or mind-blowing podcasts or any other fun entertainment. They just have literal stories and rumors, and then it just like goes into their mind, and then they can imagine seeing it, and then the next morning they wake up and suddenly it's a memory for them.
Yeah, it's so wild. And it's like, I don't know, part of me thinks maybe the Trailer brothers tried to kill Fisher.
Yeah.
And then Fisher kind of escaped.
That's what it sounds like. It sounds like to me they beat him and they thought they killed him, and then he was just unconscious and woke up.
Right. But the thing is then he still had to make it 100 miles back to his house in a very little amount of time.
Yeah.
Well, actually about 11 days. So maybe he could have done it. Walk 10 miles a day.
Someone could have given a ride or just something.
Yeah. So maybe he just got freaked out, and then he said, okay, well, I'm just not going to tell anybody what happened. So that definitely could have happened. For him to travel 100 miles, on his own, anyone would get to their destination after not eating and maybe not having any money or anything.
You might remember one little detail.
Yeah, but maybe you'd be pretty tired and not want to go on another stupid horseback trip. He's like, I'm not going back to Springfield.
Yeah, you tell him
You tell him I'm not going.
Do you know if there was any truth to the thing that the Postmaster General said about the brother bragging that this guy died and left him all the money?
It sounds like he did do it. I think unless the Postmaster General had it out for William, it seems to, I don't know. It seems to me like
that was probably true.
Yeah. And what the Postmaster General said was that he had told a bunch of people, like he was out there like really being like, oh, I killed Fisher. I'm going to get his money. Da, 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 da. He's dead in Springfield. Like he said it a bunch.
Yeah. So they must have just beat his ass in that thicket, which I love thinking about a crime in a thicket. I don't love thinking about crimes or violence. Muriel, don't try to trick me into becoming a fan of your dirty, dirty true crime tales. But that is a pretty, there's something very evocative about a beating in a thicket. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Also, if I'm following you correctly, most of this research came from an essay Abe Lincoln wrote.
Yeah.
So he was kind of like a little true crime writer.
He was. A lot of people were back in the day. Like I think Benjamin Franklin wrote some, and like Abe Lincoln. Yeah. People like to just report on crimes. But it makes sense to me. Trials were like the hot shit back then. Executions. People would be out there being like, woof. Honey, get dressed. We got to get out there to see that guy get hanged.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, right. And he's like, well, I have to build a reputation somehow. I'm thinking from like Abe Lincoln's point of view, right? So he's like, I need people to know about my cases and what I've done and my work history.
I don't know. I think it's just like way too ridiculous of a case. It's not like he did anything. You know what I mean? It's what is he bragging about? Like he didn't even do anything. He called one witness as the defense, and they just liked the witness, so they let the guys go.
Yeah,
I mean, he didn't do that.
Yeah, I don't see that as being very honest, Mr. Abe.
No, I think he just thought it was like the weirdest thing. He was just like, not only is the story so weird, it just really shines a light on how people were acting. They tore apart their town. looking for a body. And then they were hella sad and disappointed at the trial. I just think that's so funny. He's just like, these fools out here are tripping.
Was there any like editorializing in Abe Lincoln's essay about this?
He doesn't need it because this is just a straightforward story. The facts are the facts.
Right.
And the facts are just like, what? I mean, it's just great. It's just this really funny thing to me.
What about the deaths of the brothers so shortly after the trial?
I think it was all just natural.
Uh-huh.
They died.
You don't think Fisher came back for him?
No, I think you want this to be bigger than it is because you love true crime.
Muriel, you trickster.
So all the info for this story is pulled from an essay Lincoln wrote called The Remarkable Case of Arrest for Murder.
Wow. Hear that, people? You're getting it direct from Abe Lincoln. That is our number one source. Is he like a good writer? I assume it was like
people
a fun
say
read.
The intro, I got this essay in a book of essays, and the intro to the essay talks a lot about how Lincoln is this really articulate, beautiful crime writer. But I think he was just spilling the tea. I don't think it was fine. It was just funny because it's a very like straightforward accounting of what happened.
Yeah.
It's definitely not like editorialized in any way.
Right, it's not Truman Capote quite yet.
No. It's like, then this happened, and then this happened, and on this date this happened. And they're like, wow, that guy has a crazy sense of humor.
God, is he Shakespeare? Let's make him president.
I mean, the letter he wrote to his friend, I think, is pretty funny.
Yeah, but he was throwing some pretty good shade.
Yeah, but it's very dry. It's like the driest shade possible, so you can kind of hear little bits of humor, where people are like, oh man, this guy, he should be a stand-up, he's so funny. It's like you can hear little pieces of that, but it's just like, it's kind of like I don't know, it's just like a very dry, dorky retelling of what happened.
Yeah, right. Great. Unlike this incredible retelling by you, Muriel.
Oh,
thank you very much. I appreciated my history lesson, and if you test me, give me an A no matter what.
Okay, honey.
Okay, great.
I'll test you every day of your life.
Thank you so much for listening to Muriel's Murders. As always, Muriel did all the research and I did the sound engineering and the post-production.
That's right. So thanks for nothing, universe. To help support the podcast and to unlock exclusive episodes, please sign up for our Patreon at www.patreon.com/murielsmurders.
I also draw and animate little bonus cartoons, and some of those Muriel and I actually collaborate on real closely, and that is what populates our social media feed. So please find us at Muriel's Murders on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok.
That's right. Actually, these cartoons are pretty whack in a good way.
Wacky.
They're really great. They're pretty wild. Some of them are outrageous. Some of them are, I don't know, we troll ourselves.
Yeah,
they're great.
We're proud of them. Please find us on social media. And as always, our DMs are open and you can email us at murielsmurders@gmail.com.
Please rate and review Muriel's Murders on Apple Podcasts. I swear to God, it really does help us grow.
Our music is by Mario Castellini. Find him on Instagram at Castellini Beats.
Thank you to Ryan and Ryan at Campfire Media.
And if you want more Nick and Muriel, please check out our non-murder podcast, Hella in Your 30s, wherever you get your podcasts.
Thanks for listening.
We'll see you next Wednesday.